Hi, everyone. Frank Hartman here from Biblical Mastery Academy. I haven't done a book review in our series of videos yet, but I was recently sent a new intermediate Hebrew grammar from the kind publishers at B&H Publishing, and I wanted to take this opportunity to give you my impressions. I've had it for about 4 weeks, and I've read not the entire bulk of it because it is 750 pages, which is remarkable. But I've read a lot of it and looked into it in depth enough that I think I'm in a good position to give you an honest opinion about whether this intermediate grammar is going to be worth your time and investment. Now, the grammar in question is called Going Deeper with Biblical Hebrew. The authors are, and to get this right, I'm just going to read this from the back cover, H. Hardy II, Associate Professor of Old Testament and Semitic Languages at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And you may have read some of Dr. Hardy's other works, which are always very educational and positive as you're learning Hebrew. And also Matthew McAfee, Provost, Dean, and Professor of Old Testament at Welch Divinity School. So these two Hebrew professors have made an incredible 750-page intermediate grammar. And not to leave out, there's also a contribution in here from John Mead, specifically the text criticism elements, a chapter on that, as well as a guided lesson on that. So want to give John Mead credit there too, even though he's not on the cover of the book. But through this collaboration, they've done quite a bit of work here to help fill that somewhat empty space of the intermediate Hebrew grammar. If you've looked into learning Hebrew or have learned Hebrew, maybe a first year of Hebrew at seminary or on your own, you know there's not a shortage today. We're really blessed. There's not a shortage today of first year Hebrew grammars that you can choose from. Many of them very excellent, like Kutz and Josberger, for instance, the one I use to teach at Biblical Mastery Academy. There's also Pratico Van Pelt. There's Furtado. There's Ross. So there's even more than that, and you can really pick and choose and go through all of them as you're learning your first year. But when you finish your first year of Hebrew and you've kind of got that first year vocabulary down and you've been introduced to all the grammar and morphology and your reading is sort of developing, then you get, what do you do for your second year? The choice of intermediate grammars is a lot more limited. And so this was a real area that I'm happy to say these professors have filled very well with this work. Now, I want to just kind of structure this in that I'd like to just introduce you to the layout of this grammar, and then I want to share with you three positives that I found in this grammar and three negatives that also struck me. It was hard to find the negatives, to be honest, and it was hard to cull down the positives to just three. But I'll try to do the best I can there. So overall, the grammar is laid out in three basic parts, A, B, and C, and then followed by some extraneous information, extra information, which is still just as valuable. Interestingly, in this grammar, we don't really start with grammar. Part A is 75 pages long. It comprises two chapters, and they're divided between a history of the Hebrew language and a lot of the phenomenon of the Hebrew language, where it came from, the script, as well as some of the language features. And then chapter 2 is that text criticism chapter by John Mead, talking about where did we get the manuscripts. And it includes not only the Masoretic text, but talks a lot about the Septuagint and its influence, as well as addressing the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the first 75 pages of the book are not necessarily limited to a second year Hebrew student. If you're a first year Hebrew student and you've never really kind of understood where the language came from and where the manuscripts come from, just reading the first section of this book during your learning of the first year of Hebrew will give you context, will give you a background that usually is not included specifically in a lot of first year grammars. So I would highly recommend that for the first year learners. Part B then dives into the grammar itself, and it starts with the verbal system and goes through the verbal stems. And I really appreciate that because as a Hebrew teacher, I know that's the part of the learning Hebrew exercise that usually takes a long time to get down and is the one that most first year students, after their first year, they are still stuck on the stems and the conjugations and how to recognize them and weak verbs and things. So addressing that first in this book, the part that first addresses grammar to the student, um, addresses something that they probably learned second in their first year grammar. It's freshest in their minds. And so the verb first, which is unlike a lot of other intermediate grammars that start with nouns and adjectives and particles and then moves to verbs later. I like that they start with verbs first here. And part C then addresses everything else: nouns, adjectives, conjunctions, adverbs, particles, and then finally the prepositions is the last section in chapter 11. So, and prepositions, like in any other language, Hebrew prepositions, they're like trying to nail jello to a tree. It's hard to give them a one specific meaning, and so uh, kind of putting them last, I don't think minimizes that, but it does allow the reader and the student to have most of this book under their belt prior to getting into the really murky water sometimes of the prepositional grammar. That's followed then by more content that I think really sets this book apart from others of its type. And that is, we have 3 guided lessons that are specific to a particular topic. The first one is on textual criticism. The second is on semantic analysis. And the third is on syntactic analysis. Each of those guided exercises walks the student through what do those analysis mean? What are the important things that we're looking for here? And actually being able to work through an example using the techniques there. So I think that's very helpful. Then the grammar has 4 appendices. Um, Appendix A is continuing with Hebrew. So here the authors present a lot of excellent resources as to where to go forward now with Hebrew, because you want to keep practicing. Otherwise, you'll lose it. There's also vocabulary here. That's Appendix B, Biblical Hebrew vocabulary. And the vocabulary that's included in this is made into word lists that you can divide up. The individual word lists have about 7 words apiece, which is pretty manageable. And with 90 different word lists, you can divide these word lists up depending on how long you want to take to learn this vocabulary. Now, this vocabulary is going to be in addition to the first year vocabulary. This vocabulary is going to be at a frequency of about 40 words that are used in the Hebrew text, 40 times or more. Your typical first year grammar is going to be more like 75. So these are going to be rarer words. They also have a nice listing of about the first, I think it was 258 words that you should have learned in your first year grammar. That's very helpful. So whatever method you use for your first year, you can compare your vocabulary knowledge against this list. And if they're very familiar, these 258 words or something, if you don't have any problem with them, you're set to go. You can move on to the next level. If you need to review some of the first year grammar, first year vocabulary, then you should do that before moving on. But this at least allows you to kind of bookmark where are you on your Hebrew vocabulary. Appendix C is kind of interesting. It's a English to Hebrew catalog. So it's a listing of English words, and then you get the Hebrew equivalent. So like the word boy, and then in the right-hand column is yalad. So it's the vocabulary is it's not extensive. If you it might be useful for a quick lookup, oh, I can't remember what girl is in Hebrew, and you might look it up real quick just to see. But it's an English 2 um, Hebrew catalog. And then Appendix D is a glossary, which is really handy because this grammar brings forth a lot of linguistic information and terminology that may not be familiar to the average second year intermediate grammar student. So you can look in this glossary to find a lot of the definitions um, that are used in the book. Then there's a bibliography, which is really good, and that'll relate to my first positive. But um, there are also three indices or three indexes. There's a name index, so names of individuals that are used in the book. You can find them again quickly if you can't remember where you read about them. Subject indexes, so if you want to remember, what I'm just looking for information on the Vegetal. And so you can look that up and see which part of the book deals with that in case you don't want to thumb through the whole thing because it is 750 pages. And and then there's a scripture index in the end, and that's always really handy for all of the scripture examples that are used, and the book is just chock full of them. All of the examples for the grammar that all the scripture examples for the grammar. If you want to look for a particular scripture in the scripture index, you can do that. See if that is addressed and go to the page right in the book. So three very useful indexes here. All right. Well, what are the three positives that I can bring forth from this intermediate grammar? The first one is that it's really loaded with footnotes. It's very generous with footnotes and non-trivial footnotes. Footnotes that lead to articles that for further study, footnotes that explain a term that might have been used in the paragraph above. The authors have been very good about footnoting for the student either where their argument is cited, but even more than that, where the student can go look up the article themselves if that's an interesting topic they want to have more information about. One caveat on that, a lot of the footnotes point to academic level books or academic journal articles. Not all students are going to have access to this. So if you're in a seminary, that's great. You can use your seminary library. You probably have access to this level of resource. But if you're a home study person, just you're studying on yourself by yourself or with a church group or something, you may find that the resource that's cited by the footnote isn't something you can find at your local library or have access to because they're at an academic level somewhere. So be aware of that. But overall, that's a very positive thing that there are footnotes throughout the book, and it's well worth your time to go ahead and go down to the bottom of the page, check out the footnote when it's cited. The second thing is that unlike some intermediate grammars, this one is laid out like a textbook, as if the purpose was to teach, which is really great because some intermediate grammars are laid out like a dictionary or a reference book. Great for looking up things, but hard to actually go through page by page and learn from. Here we have a layout that's very intentional for learning purposes. And it's what I would like to call very illustrative. There's a lot of charts and diagrams and columns, tables of things to help some of these advanced grammatical topics make sense in a visual way. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So these authors take advantage of that and give us a fair amount of these pictures to be able to capture the thoughts that they're expressing in words. And finally, I think just from the layout that I went over earlier, you can tell there's a lot more to this book than just an intermediate grammar. There's great introduction material, history material of both the language and the text. There are useful appendices. There's very useful indices, and then the guided lessons. Now, every chapter in the book is going to have exercises at the end, about 10 to 14 or so typical exercises in Hebrew that ask you to do different things, parse these verbs, um, identify parts of a sentence, and that can be very helpful. And they're all scripture verses, so you can always go to the Bible, your Hebrew Bible, to double check to see if your parsing's right and that kind of thing, because there is no answer key to the exercises, but you can double check in the Bible. They also have a few exercises at the end of each chapter that are translating from English to Hebrew. That can be debatable how useful that is. It depends on your own desire to be able to do that. Um, so your mileage may vary. Let me say that as to the usefulness of that. Um, but it's there, and you could do that, and that's at every chapter. Now at the end, there's also the 3 guided lessons, which, as I mentioned earlier, aren't so much exercises as they are opportunities to be guided through some of these topics. And they're very helpful too. So that's my third positive, that all that extra information in what's really, touts itself to be an intermediate study of the grammar and syntax of the Old Testament. Oh, it's a lot more than that. So that's why it's 750 pages. Again, it was hard for me to find 3 negatives because it is a very good intermediate grammar. But the first one I kind of feel from a teacher point of view, this would be a difficult book to just teach from. With 750 pages, how much would you be able as an instructor to assign to your students for reading without overwhelming them and still complete the book in a typical intermediate grammar course? It's only 1 semester in most seminaries. Intermediate or second level, second year Hebrew is 1, maybe 2 semesters. But usually that intermediate grammar class is 1 semester, 16 weeks, and then there's maybe another advanced class after that or something. I couldn't imagine trying to get through all 750 pages of this in 16 weeks. It would be hard. So for the instructor, it can be teachable from, but you would have to go through and divide up kind of how much can I ask the students to read. There may be sections in there that you may say, just read them, peruse them, skim them, but don't feel like you need to master them. This section, this part from page this to page that before moving on, because it would be very intimidating for the second year student to have to read that much to complete the entire book. But on the other hand, as I said, it's very illustrative. And so that is actually a help to the teaching. But it may be difficult for the instructor to decide what pieces do I emphasize, what pieces don't I. The second negative, and this may just be personal taste, but when in the verb section for the perfect and the imperfect conjugations of verbs, the authors chose to go with a prefixed nomenclature and a suffixed nomenclature. And that's not unheard of in Hebrew grammars, but anymore, more and more we're moving prefix and suffix kind of outside of the verb to things like pronominal suffixes and that kind of thing, and trying to call what belongs to the verb preformatives and sufformatives so that we don't get the suffix prefix stuff mixed up. That's okay. It's not terrible that this is the way the perfect is the suffixed conjugation. The imperfect is the prefix conjugation. That's the model that these authors are using. You can get used to that. If that's not part of your first year grammar nomenclature usage, that's fine. You'll get used to it. You know what they're talking about. They're pretty clear about that. But I would have preferred not seeing prefix and suffix used because it can get confusing to students. And the third weakness I would say is, I don't know if this is unavoidable anymore in books, but typos. And just the typos that occur, they're not for, they're not everywhere. It's not terrible, but there's some of these were like really simple that I'm so surprised a proofreader didn't find these things, like a footnote that says, for more information, go to chapter 8 for this, when in fact it should have been chapter 5 based on the content, right? I mean, 8 and a 5. I don't know how you not proofread that. Or one of the most amusing typos I saw was 2 footnotes where the author, if I remember right, his name is Olinsky, ending in a Y, ski with a Y. The very next footnote was a footnote to the same author, to the exact same work, but it was ending in an I, ski with an I. And I'm like, these 2 footnotes are like next to each other, and the authors' names are different. How did you not pick that up? So that's one of these little irritating things I get. I don't know how that still happens today with our computers and everything, but no, typos are always going to be the bane of anybody that publishes a book. So again, I'll share, I had a hard time finding negative. So if you feel I'm really being really picky, I wanted to find 3. And so, but overall, I just want to say that going deeper with biblical Hebrew, this is going to be a classic, if you will, in second year in intermediate level Hebrew going forward. There's so much good information in this book. You can find it on Amazon, and it's also on Logos. And based on the prices today, which is the last week of January, right before the book releases in February of 2024, the Logos version is half the price of the hardback version. Now, I don't know about what it looks like in Logos, whether, when we're dealing with Hebrew text and stuff, and a lot of charts and a lot of diagrams, you always run the risk of them looking very funky in a digital form. They're beautiful in printed form. So it costs more, but it would probably be worth it to have both. So I hope you found this helpful. If you would like me to do more book reviews, I'd be glad to get feedback on that. Just leave something in the comments below, and we'll see if I can do some more and help you in that way. If you would like to learn Hebrew, of course, we here at Biblical Mastery Academy would love to be able to help you do that. And we have multiple resources for that. You can go to bma.to/shalom and get a free Hebrew starter bundle. It's just chock full of resources for you to be able to start your Hebrew learning journey. And finally, if you like the content on this channel, please feel free to subscribe to it, where you can learn a lot about Hebrew language, Greek language, and your opportunity to learn it better. Also, click the bell to subscribe, and you'll be notified when new videos do come out. So until we get a chance to speak to one another again, I wish you the best, and shalom.